Right, thank you very much. It's very exciting to be here because we spend most of our time in academic conferences, so it's really nice to see a different audience. People who actually do stuff instead of just research it. So yeah, my name's Birgitta Gatersleben, which is, I'm Dutch by the way, in case anyone wonders. Birgitta is Swedish and Gatersleben is German, so it's a bit of a mixture. And I run the Environmental Psychology Research Group at the University of Surrey. For those of you who probably nobody knows what environmental psychology is. So environmental psychology, basically, we study the interaction between individuals and their physical environment, the natural and the built environment. And so that, for instance, includes how engaging with nature, which is very relevant for today, I guess, for a lot of people here, changes people's attitudes towards nature and also how it affects their health and well-being. My lovely colleague, Melissa, who's sitting over there, does a lot of work on mental health and nature engagement. So if you want to talk about that more, please come and see us. But that's not why I'm here today. I'm here today to talk about the Access project. So I'm the co-director of Access, and Patrick Devine-Wright from the University of Exeter, he is the director of Access. He is also here somewhere. I think he's doing an online talk today, and he'll be around this afternoon, so if you want to talk to him, please do. So this is a major investment, ESRC investment, and our goal is to champion environmental social science in the UK. I see, which button am I pressing? This one, I think. There you go. So, the aim of Access is to champion and coordinate environmental social science in the UK, in interdisciplinary research, training, policy and practice, in order to help environmental challenges, tackle environmental challenges. This is a huge, massive aim. It's really, really big. One of the things we don't do is research. But we basically want to collate and champion and bring together researchers across the UK who do fantastic work. There's a huge amount of knowledge out there on how to deal and tackle environmental issues. But it's not always well understood or valued or appreciated. So our aim is to try and champion environmental social science. And this is also one of the reasons why we're here, because we need to collaborate with other people. There's no point in social scientists or any scientists really sitting in a room in their academic institution and not talk to the people who actually implement the stuff and do things on the ground. So it's massive. As I mentioned before, we're sort of halfway through the project, a 5-year investment. I don't expect you to look at all the details here because there's far too much of it. I guess I just want you to sort of pick out, just to demonstrate that it is really, really big, that we have a lot of partners involved and associated with this. And one of the key things about this as well is that we work very closely with the nature agencies. So actually, somebody from Natural Resources Wales is on our leadership team. So we really try and work together to think about how academics can ask the right questions in order to provide the right answers, and the other way around as well. And this, of course, is quite challenging. So I just wanted to give you a couple of reflections on what we've done and learned so far. First, though, just quickly, this is our work package, our work program. If you want to know more, please go to our website, which I probably should have put on this slide, but our lovely comms manager is there, Sarah Baker. She's got some handouts, some little cards, so if you want to find out more, please go and get in touch with her and sign up to our network. Just the four work packages are, work package 1 is learning from the past, so where has environmental social science had impact? Work package 2 is all about championing. We run summer schools, collaborative workshops, and all those kinds of things. And our leadership college is one of the really interesting things. We bring together academics and non-academics who go on retreats every year, and they work together over a period of 3 years in order to understand how we work to reflect on things and try to come up with real solutions that are useful and helpful. Work package 3 is all about innovation. We have a flex fund, so we fund research as well. So our first set of research projects has just started, and we're going to commission some more research very soon. And again, it's all about collaboration and impact. And work package 4 is all about championing and communicating this research. Again, I won't go into too much more detail. I guess the next obvious question is, why do we need environmental social science? This is a question we get asked quite a lot, and I think the answer is really very simple, but I guess it's not always that obvious to a lot of people. But it's simple because all the environmental problems and the solutions that we are talking about, that we are dealing with, even the way we conceptualize them, they're all framed, defined, caused, and need to be solved by people. So how can we not involve social scientists? It's the way to define. We have decided there is a problem. People have decided there is a problem. People have decided that we need to do something about these problems. So people are really important, and understanding the social processes and the way people think is really essential to think about where we're going to go with this. And environmental social science very often is just sort of defined as behaviour change, which obviously is really important. There's a lot of environmental social scientists that do behaviour change, but it's about much more than that. It's also about trying to understand what kind of future we want, what kind of future do we want to live in, and how are we going to get there, because if we don't do anything, I don't really want to think about that. And in terms of local environments and it's not just the global environment, it's also the local environment. What do we want London to look like? What do we want? How many parks do we want? How do we want? What kind of nature do we want to protect? And of course, it's all about decision making. So social sciences is really important for that. Well, of course, when we champion environmental social science, we think, well, what things we need to do? We need to really ask the people that we are working with what actually they think environmental social science is. So this is what we did. And a lot of people came up with wonderful definitions of environmental social science, but also we got a lot of people saying things like, what do you mean? Or this is not cricky, it's crikey. Sorry, somebody spotted that yesterday. And also, I think people saying there's it means so many different things to me, or it's a vast array of different specific problems, it's complicated, it's complex, etc., which of course it is. But then the problem with that is that we also get things like this. So this is a comment that was given to us by somebody who's not a social scientist. He defined themselves as an engineer. Don't want to be anonymous here. And they said, when I ask social scientists what is social scientist and what can social science contribute, they always say, well, it's complicated, it's difficult, and they don't come up with any solutions or any useful answers. Now, that's obviously a problem. We don't want that. So we need to really communicate to people what environmental social science is. So we're trying to do this at the moment. We're trying to come up with a definition. It's not just a definition, but also a description of what does environmental social science do? How do we do what we do? What's the value of environmental social science? How can it contribute? And this is a starting point of that, creating that document. From a communication perspective, it's proving to be massively challenging, particularly because we're working with non-academics. We can write this for an academic audience because we know how to communicate with academics, because that's what we're trained to do. But talking to the environment agencies, the nature agencies, people in DEFRA, people in policy and practice, they go like, you can't do that, you can't use these words, nobody will understand them, you need to give us a little strap line. And we as academics go, but we can't do strap lines because it's far too complicated, we need to be really precise. So this is proving to be really, really challenging and really, really interesting. And I think bringing people together is the key to all of these things, to talk to each other and to communicate and collaborate to find solutions. Just wanted to say one more thing. I don't want to take too much time, but one of the key things as well, all the work that we're doing is guided by 3 cross-cutting principles: environmental sustainability, quality, diversity and inclusion, and knowledge co-production. We very strongly believe that we must practice as we preach. So we've colleagues have put together this document which actually outlines how you can do this in practice. How do you put this into practice? If you're interested, the guiding principles can be downloaded from the website. I can highly recommend having a look at it. And we also reflect on it and keep on learning and try to further develop these principles so that people can actually use this in practice. And one of the things we found, of course, that it's really complicated to actually embed all these three principles at the same time, because they're really interrelated, but they're also very often conflicting. So knowledge co-production is really important. We want people to get together, we want people to talk together, to sit around tables just like you're doing here, but that means you have to travel, get people to come here. Travel is very unsustainable. We do our best, we're trying to communicate, tell people that you must travel sustainably, we give people vegan and vegetarian food and all those kinds of things, but what about those people who come from very far away? We do want to hear their voices, but that means that they might have to fly in. So from an equality and diversity and inclusion perspective, we want to get other people's voices, but it's really difficult to do that sustainably. And so we're constantly thinking about how we're going to balance these things. How do we learn from that? So we're reflecting on this, we're writing about this, and we're developing further these guiding principles to hopefully share with others so that they can also then think about how we're going to do it. One of the things we decided is that probably more mature academics should have a smaller carbon allowance than new academics, because we don't have to travel anymore. We've done it already. Get the people who are in their early career to travel if they have to. So I'll leave it there. Just say that there's a huge value in environmental social science to address environmental challenges, which goes beyond behaviour change. And we are here to champion that work, and we really, really want people to collaborate with us. So please sign up to a network, come and talk to us and find out more. I'm going to leave it here. I'm going to hand over to Melissa, because Melissa has done some really interesting work around that I think will be really valuable for you, and it demonstrates the different ways that environmental social science can contribute to environmental policy and practice. Thank you.
I'm very short. Can anyone even see me? I was thinking about that over there. There's a stool. So hi, I'm Melissa. I am a environmental psychologist as well, and I'm also part of the Access Project. I know that Birgitta mentioned that access is more than behavior change, and social scientists do more than behavior change, and so do I. I largely and mostly research the mental health and well-being benefits of nature and biodiversity, but part of that is to conserve biodiversity, and so I also do research in this area, which is how we can respond to the biodiversity crisis by using behavioral science in policy. I'll just be really quick because I imagine you all know this, but climate change and the biodiversity crisis are interlinked. We need to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss simultaneously or not at all, and this was the outcome of a recent IPCC and IPBES report highlighting the consequences that climatic change have on nature and the loss of biodiversity and habitat loss. And as Birgitta said, human activity is the main cause, directly and indirectly, of both climate change and biodiversity loss. Now, this is sad, but it also is good, because we have two twin global crises, and the problem is the same for both of them. It is us. And therefore, the solution to both of these global crises is changing human behavior, which I think is quite positive in the face of two global environmental crises. The problem with human behavior being the main cause of climate and biodiversity loss is that for nature conservation, behavioral science is rarely used in nature conservation. There was research done in 2018 that found that just 0.3%, less than even 1% or half of a percent of all the academic papers published in the leading nature conservation journals even mentioned psychology or behavioral change. And another study, or a few other studies, found that behavior change interventions for nature conservation often lack even a theoretical grounding in behavioral science theory. So as a psychologist, we have many different theories of behavior change, how to change behavior. But when nature conservationists go to create an intervention, those behavior change theories in psychology maybe aren't known and therefore not used or applied in the development of interventions, which leads to maybe things like the Global Fund for Biodiversity looking at if they're going to fund any more work in this area, then they're going to have to embed interventions and efficacy into their funding streams. So I'm just briefly going to tell you about a behavior change framework that I use and that I find really helpful. As I said, there are a number of different behavior change theories that can be used to inform behavior change interventions. But there's a recognition that any one of those theories is kind of insufficient for explaining the totality of human behavior. It's kind of like that parable about the blind men all touching the different parts of the elephant, and they all say what it is, right, from their perspective. And it's the same with a behavior change theory. It only looks maybe at this bit, and maybe it's looking at values, and they're like, values are the solution. But another behavior change theory might say, no, we need to change the social norms to change behavior. And so we're having this sort of thing in academia now where we need these integrative theories to integrate all the best bits and the missing gap and address the missing gaps from all these different behavior change theories. And so the behavior change wheel is one such integrative framework. And these integrative frameworks are amazing, and the reason I like them is because they handle the complex links between the determinants or things that drive behavior, why do people behave the way they do, and link that to intervention and policy options. So the behavior change wheel was synthesized off of 19 different behavior change models, and it's a comprehensive framework for designing, evaluating, and characterizing behavior change interventions, and it was actually just invented by academics at UCL just around the corner. So that's quite fun for us here. And in the UK, because it was invented by people at UCL, it's used a lot in high-level policy in the UK, such as by Public Health England on how to use it in national policy, but also the Welsh government as well have documentations of how to use this framework for improving health and well-being into policy and practice. It's mostly applied to the health sector, but more and more the behavior change wheel is being applied to environmental issues like climatic change. And in academia, the behavior change wheel is being used more and more outside of the health sector to look at how we can facilitate pro-environmental behavior, like reducing water use or energy consumption, how it can be used to design interventions to increase contact with natural environments, to look at maybe the barriers to people having contact with nature and interventions to improve contact with nature, and in what I'll talk about, biodiversity conservation. So the behavior change wheel has 3 wheels. In the middle, in the green, are the determinants or the sources of behavior. So these are things like our capabilities, our opportunities, and our motivations to engage in behavior. I'll break that down a little bit more in 2 more slides. In fact, I'll break down all of this a bit more. In the middle of the behavior change wheel are, in red, are the intervention types. So these are 9 different interventions that link to these sources of behavior. And then on the outside, are the 7 policy options that support the delivery of the interventions. And the behavior change wheel is so great because it takes all the work out of trying to link the sources of behavior to the interventions. If you find that the main issue or main barrier for people is, say, a lack of knowledge, then it links you to the interventions to help overcome that barrier, which is fantastic. So the first step in designing any behavior change is to find out who needs to do what and when. So Behavior change theory is just beneficial in helping identify who needs to do what. So what is the behavior that needs to change, and then who needs to do that. So this is the first way any sort of behavioral science can help improve intervention design and policy. So who needs to do what? After that, you can then use the behavior change wheel, the inner bit of it, the green bit, to find out the why. So we have a specific behavior that we want people to do. Why aren't they, and who are these particular people? Sorry, who are these particular people, and why aren't they doing this behavior? So we need to look at, maybe is it their psychological and physical ability to engage in that behavior? Do they maybe not understand the impact of CO2 on the climate, for example? Or maybe it's the motivations, the mental processes that activate or inhibit behavior, so maybe plans or intentions, and how can we help people with that? Or maybe it's opportunities. Maybe there are aspects of the physical and social environment that could enable, or maybe they're hindering behavior, such as maybe the absence or the inclusion of bike lanes might, activate or hinder behavior. So, and then the behavior change wheel has, as I said, 9 different interventions. These different intervention types are things like education to increase knowledge, restriction using rules, environmental restructuring, so changing the physical or social environment, modeling. This is not statistical modeling or fashion models, but using an example or social role model for people to emulate, leading by example. I'll just mention a few more. Training, obviously, training people, giving skills. Coercion is not what you think it is. It's using the expectation of a punishment or a cost to change behavior, which is the opposite of incentivization, which is creating an expectation of a reward for engaging in a behavior. And then finally, there are 7 different policy options that the behavior change wheel gives to help deliver those interventions. And the behavior change wheel can be used to design new interventions or policies by going through some of the steps I just discussed, defining, what's the target behavior, what's the target group, understanding why the target group is or is not engaging in this target behavior, and then from that, looking at the full range of intervention options available to address those determinants of behavior. You can also use the behavior change wheel to retrospectively to identify what's in current interventions and policies, to maybe identify gaps, and I'll give an example of how I do that. You can use it for evaluation. How are interventions working? Have they missed any steps? And you can use it for systematic review of evidence. So I'll discuss and give an example of how I use the behavior change wheel retrospectively. Now, the point of applying the behavior change wheel retrospectively is to basically identify what intervention functions and policy categories from the behavior change wheels are excluded or included, which ones maybe are being overused, or are there anything that's being overlooked. And I did this to national pollinator policies in the EU and the UK. And this is published in the Journal of Conservation Biology. It's an open access, so you can read it without any paywall or anything like that. And the reason that we focused on pollinators is because pollinators and insects are declining all over the world, and the loss of pollinators is huge implications for human health and well-being. Pollinators provide us with the food that we eat, and without them, how are we going to eat? How are we going to feed ourselves? In addition to the other cultural benefits of flowers and things like this. So there have been high-level policies to conserve pollinators, and we retrofitted the behavior change wheel to see how well these work when applying behavioral science. And so we looked at these 9 different policies. The ones at the bottom are of relevance to you here in the UK, because it's the pollinator policy for whales, the DEFRA's pollinator policy for England, the pollinator policy for Scotland, and all of Ireland's pollinator policy at the bottom. And then at the top are those created in the Netherlands, Belgium, France, and the European Union. And what we did was in each of these pollinator policies, they say, this is what England or this is what Wales is going to do for pollinators, and they have a list of actions. And these list of actions, here's an example here, is from England: develop and test a new systematic and sustainable monitoring framework for pollinators to be implemented by professionals using a citizen science approach involving volunteers. And then we take that action and then we look at how those different aspects of that action map onto the behavior change wheel. So the provision of a pollinator monitoring scheme is an example of an enablement intervention type in the behavior change wheel, and the development of this monitoring scheme is an example of a service provision policy option in the behavior change wheel. So we did this. There were 610 conservation actions in the 8 different policy documents that resulted in over 700 codes for us. Now, the first thing that we did was look at the target group, so whose behavior needs to change, and we also looked at the agent of change, so who's responsible for enacting that change. And the first thing that we found was that in 40% of those 680 conservation actions, 40% of those failed to specify whose behavior needed to change. Now this is, I think, a good opportunity and a quick win for how we can improve biodiversity policies by making them more targeted and effective, is just identifying who's the target group that needs to change their behavior. Now, when it was specified, the biggest group who needed to change their behavior was at the level of individuals. So still largely individuals, but we're not hitting maybe, opportunities for transformative change at maybe the level of business or leading by example of local and national governments. And when we look at the agent of change, it's not surprising, these are national policy documents. The agent of change was largely the national government. So this is what DEFRA is going to do, or this is what the Ministry of Environment in France is going to do for pollinators. But they, as you see here, they were very rarely the target as well. So they could be maybe perhaps leading it as an example a little bit more. This is the behavior change wheel, the interventions and policy options of it, and the full range of intervention types available to conserve pollinators were not being used in these pollinator documents. The most frequently used intervention was the education, the idea that people will conserve pollinators if we just tell them how great they are and how important they are. But we know from research that education on its own is quite ineffective at changing behavior in and of itself. And so to be more effective, education interventions need to be combined with some of the other intervention options available here on the wheel. And in contrast, the behavior change intervention of coercion, so this is perhaps, having interventions that have the expectation of a punishment or a cost, like maybe raising the prices of using some pesticides that harm pollinators, for example, not mentioned in any of the 8 national pollinating, in any of the policy documents. So you're missing a trick here, right? Because research shows that coercion is one of the most effective behavior change strategies available. Just think of the plastic bag, how we all have to pay for plastic bags now and how that has fundamentally changed behavior. So this auditing process helps us identify which behavior change interventions are being overused and where there are gaps or opportunities that are being missed. But also, it highlights that basically there was 1/5 of all of the actions were just unclassifiable for the behavior change wheel. And that's because they either didn't mention behavior change at all because they were about research. We need more research about pollinator habitat interactions, or they were just too vague the action was just too vague to be understood in any behavioral science level. All right, so in conclusion, to enable transformative change, we need to change human behavior for nature conservation. Global biodiversity targets have been failed to be met in the last 10 years, and we're in a biodiversity crisis. And this is because perhaps behavioral sciences aren't being applied maybe enough in policy or practice. Our analysis found that behavioral policies are not behaviorally specific enough. There are opportunities for improvement. Specifically in the identification of the target group could be a quick win. Some intervention functions were being overused, like education, while others were being maybe overlooked or little used. And maybe the behavior change wheel can help look at, there are these other options available to helping, what tools are in the toolbox to help fight biodiversity loss. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of our speakers. And we have a bit of time now for reflection and comments and questions from our audience here in Bristol and online. I know we have some conservation scientists in the room, some conservation science funders, lots of people from DEFRA, people specializing in pollinators. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but we'd love to hear your perspective on that. I think a good place to start while I wait for any hands to go up, it really is this challenge, I think, that those of us working in practice are not using effectively behavior change. Because I think that kind of comes to the nub of the researcher practitioner divide that we often see in this sector. A few people nodding at that. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about that, either of you.
Should I start because you? I think it all comes down to collaboration, isn't it? Co-production, because if we can't expect people to know all of the stuff that Melissa has just been presenting, because that's why we do research. But also we often don't talk enough to practitioners to actually find out can you actually do this in practice, and how does it work in practice? So. And we are sometimes really bad at communicating academic outcomes. So events like this and collaborating and putting time aside to work together. One of the things that there's more pressure on academia now to have impact. So there's more pressure on academics to do research that actually is taken up. But we need time, resources to actually do it properly. I think it is definitely changing, and I'm hopeful, but it's moving in the right direction. But as always, everything moves too slowly.
And what about the how we find out information? Most people in the room don't have access necessarily to academic journals. You mentioned some that are open access. I'd be really interested to see how many people are accessing open access journals to inform their work, or where we're getting our inspiration from.
Following on to what Birgitta said, the onus is on me to communicate with DEFRA and the Welsh government and the Scottish government about the findings from this analysis. And it was Lorraine Whitmarsh herself was like, well, have you done that? And I was like, yeah, you're right, I haven't. She's like, have you created a one-pager where you just summarize the results from the Welsh document and give that to somebody in Wales? I'm like, no, I haven't. That sounds like something I should have really done. But then the problem is that I don't know, I don't have communications with, who would I send that to? I can't just say, Wales at welshgov.com, right? So I think the other thing is I need to know better how to communicate my results to the people who are working, and I need to know who I need to communicate to, which is why Access is so great, because it helps link social scientists to practitioners, so then we know who we can email with something like this.
One more question. I know we've got one here and one from online. It was also really fascinating, this point about, was it point 3 of Nature conservation papers, yes, bringing in some of this research? And again, I'm not going to put the conservation scientists in the room on the spot, but what's your thought about why that is?
Go on, Melissa.
I had the pleasure of working at the German Center for Integrated Biodiversity for 3.5 years, and so I was the only psychologist and one of 5 social scientists working in a biodiversity research center. So I think that kind of tells you there's not really a lot of from the nature conservationists, the ecologists that I work with, they're amazing at what they do. They're absolutely great. And I got a sense that the social science bit was perceived as easy, and it was just something that like anyone could do. And my whole point was like, no, I could help you be a bit better. You know, we could use theory in that survey. You know, we could, if you want to do behavior change, I could help with that a little bit. Or, oh, you're doing a butterfly monitoring scheme. We could evaluate the mental health benefits of the volunteers who take part in that. And so I think it's just largely not having access to a social scientist who can then just add that little bit more value.
Okay, brilliant. Well, let's take a couple of questions. Can we do 3 maybe, just for time? Izzy, do you want to read one, give the microphone here, and then we'll bring it back here and we'll do all 3. Thanks, Izzy.
So we have a question from online, which is to both of you, either of you. How are these principles feeding into the policy decision makers, and how might we accelerate the transformative change? Are policymakers using these principles?
Great. Should we take a couple if you want to give the microphone?
Thanks very much. Danielle Mulder at the BBC. Great presentation, by the way. Really like your the behaviour change wheel. It's great work, and I really would like to follow up with you actually about how to apply that, not just across the BBC, but perhaps using our content as well. One thought that I've got in my mind at the moment is we're kind of treating the headache with drugs. You know, we're kind of like looking at the interventions that we need to make and tackling this. We understand that the diagnosis, if you like, but I'm not sure we're quite getting to the cure, because I think the cure is actually changing the way people think, which is a really, really big one and a tough one. So we need to change the way we think about our relationship with nature. It's philosophical, it's massive. It's changing the way we live our lives, the way that we work, the way that we interact with nature. Everything needs to fundamentally change. And the problem with some of these frameworks that I'm working with anyway is that they're kind of interventions that are like almost like giving yourself a bit of Nurofen for a headache, right? But we need to figure out why have we got a headache in the first place, and address the root cause. So I'd really love a conversation about that. How do we change the way people think?
Can we take one more? If you've got those down, Lisa.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it. I'm sort of wondering how you see the context in which this is happening. So it's a beautiful, logical, rational world, even though you're measuring the way people are. But if I'm in a cake shop and and I really want to eat the cakes because the cakes are all there, and maybe there's an electric shock, or maybe there's some regulation, or maybe I'm educated about, you know, there's a lot of education, I can still smoke or drink or eat cakes. And so we live in a world where often it's led by financial reward, for example, which has kind of replaced our other kind of motivations, or sometimes psychologically we think that if we get 2 cars and etc., and that we're going to feel better, because that's the story, that's a common shared narrative. So your perfect wheel is in a context, and somehow I know of course you're going to feel the context through it, but it's actually not being acknowledged somewhere, this fish tank that we're in, and how to actually move out of the fish tank and embrace the context of why politicians. We don't do what's good for us. We don't have the same levels of agency. There are very few people somehow who have much more agency than everybody else. That's the kind of context. That and instincts. Power, agency, instincts, storytelling.
That is 3 incredibly rich questions for you both. be great to hear your thoughts. We've only got kind of 5 minutes left. So.
Do you want to go with the first one? I wasn't sure what the principles were. The first one, or is there any questions?
I'll start and we'll see where we end up. I won't take too long, so I'll give Melissa some time. I think one of the things we had discussions within Access is that when we communicate our research, we don't communicate with politicians, because politicians make decisions based on policy. So we communicate, and there's almost no point in talking to them because they might disappear. You know, and they will, even though, they do their evidence-based decision making, but actually, in the moment, they make decisions within a political sphere. So we communicate our research with the sort of knowledge, there's knowledge brokers and nature agencies and DEFRA and governments, and there's a lot of people who really, really do the right thing and want to make the right decisions, and they're pushing, but then when it comes down to the actual decision making, it's a political decision. So, I mean, that answers some of the questions, and I completely agree. We need to change people's mindsets. It's not so much about, it's the question about where do we want to be and not just how do we get there. So, of course, the behaviour change wheel is partly the story about how we're going to get there, which is really valuable and really, really important, but it's also the question of where do we want to be, and we are absolutely, like you said, we're working within a model which is very much driven by financial short-term decisions, and in order to change our mindset, we need to think long-term, and we need to put more value on nature and biodiversity and future generations rather than short-term financial gains. That's what we need to. That's where we need to go to. How do we get there? The only way we're going to get there is by keep on having these conversations and changing the values and the goals that what we live in. And it's going to take time. But the harder people push, and the more we discuss and talk to people, the better it is. And sometimes it requires starting conversations with those who we don't actually want to talk to sort of nudge it ahead, but it's difficult. I'll let Melissa give us the answer how to do that.
I'm not an expert in behavior change at all, but I know a tool that I use. Yes. So yeah, the how do we change how people live, work, and interact with nature? Sadly, I think it's we want preventative healthcare solutions, right? Rather than, oh no, you have cancer, now you have to change your lifestyle, sort of things, right? And if we're hopeful, it'd be great if we had these preventative solutions by changing our behavior. I mean, we need good political leadership, and you have that in London with, low traffic neighborhoods and putting in cycle lanes and giving people alternatives for traveling around and improving the environment. I think the more and more recognition that we have for co-benefits of how we change the way we live is not something that's going to be restrictive, but have a lot of benefits is helpful. When I did my PhD 10 years ago in the mental health benefits of group walks in nature, I went to a World Health Organization conference on physical activity. And they were saying at that conference, I want people to do physical activity not just for their physical health, but for their mental health. And I think now, 10 years later, very quick, people are realizing more and more, I go for a walk, for my mental health, not for my physical health. And quickly, similarly with people realizing the positives of nature, I mean, COVID has really brought a lot of the benefits that spending time in nature helped reduce stress, and it's a good thing for me, having nature, gardening. And so things are happening really, really fast, where we're realizing on a general public level the benefits of nature. Sadly, this is happening simultaneously when we're losing it. So we do have opportunities for pushing this and changing the way that we live, because I think we've all experienced it a little bit more.
Thank you. I was thinking of something else, actually, somebody else said yesterday at an event I was, and it was really interesting, because what she was saying is that we as human beings, we all know what we want. We want to live in a world where we can access green space where there's no traffic noise, where we're healthy and happy. So we are collaborative people. Human beings like talking to each other. So when we think about behavior change, it's maybe not so much thinking about we need to push people to do things they don't want to do. And that's very often the story that we're communicating when we're talking about the environment. But actually, people want to have a healthy environment. People want to engage with nature. People want to talk to each other. People want to collaborate. And maybe it's about removing the barriers to enable them to be the people that they want to be, to create the environment that they want to have. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that we need to think about.
Okay, this is just the start of the conversation today, I think. Before we thank our speakers, I just want to give a little heads up, a little roadmap into what's happening next. So we've got a little breathing space now of about 15 minutes. If you want to carry on the conversations, grab a coffee or anything. We are then going to invite you to stand up and choose either to stay in this room. We've got parallel sessions. In this room, we've got a session on communicating your biodiversity impact. Upstairs in the boardroom, we've got a session on innovative dialogue, where we'll be looking at the People's Plan for Nature and the Natural Environment Research Council's public dialogue programme as well. That's on the first floor, but there is a mezzanine, so it's kind of the second floor. So do use the lift if you need to for any reason. We really look forward to taking a lot of these conversations forward. I think you're around for a little bit longer today, and there's other people from the programme coming along. What a great start to today's conversations. If you could help me thank our speakers.
Good. So now